another video game history lesson. The great video game crash of 1985. It's important. Hi everybody, welcome back to Daily Gamer Opinion. I am Joe the Widget. Today I'm going to give you guys another little history lesson in the video game world. As you guys know, I am a bit of a historian and, well, a study of video game culture and history. And one of the biggest events to ever occur in video game history that kind of changed the face of video games as we know it and how the industry runs occurred back in 1985. It originally started in 1983. That was when the Atari system was out and really started the video game industry. The video games had began long before the Atari, almost 20 years prior, but more secluded and not well known. Very little known, in fact, if you weren't a college campus student who was an engineering major, or a really big computer nerd. Either way, video games really started booming when the Atari 2600 took the market. And back in 1983, the revenues for the industry peaked at $3.2 billion, which put the video game industry in the top 5 entertainment industries in the world. And that was in 1983, but then fell down to $100 million by 1985. That is a monster fall. A drop of 97%. Now the crash was a serious event that was brought into a rather abrupt end. To what is retrospectively considered the second generation of console video gaming in North America, aka the NES and the Sega. The crash almost destroyed the booming industry. And nearly destroyed the video game industry. It almost came to an end. If NES didn't come out, you could say that video games would not be as they are today. Not even close. In fact, we probably wouldn't even have home consoles. I think video gaming would be mostly PC. The only industry that was still surviving during that time was some PC gaming. However, it led to a bankruptcy in the video game industry of several companies, including a lot of home computer and video game consoles. In fact, Atari was one of those that was filing for bankruptcy. The crash lasted about 2 years. Analysts at the time expressed doubts about the long-term viability of the video game console and software, but we all know that wasn't the case. The North American video game console industry recovered a few years later, and that was mostly completely due, in my opinion, to the Nintendo Entertainment System, the Famicom, which released back in Japan a few years prior and became very popular and was moved to North America back in 1985. It has a really soft launch in 1985, but really became super popular in 1987. I remember going to my grandmother's house when she was telling my mom that, she bought this new entertainment system that is the latest and greatest, and it's awesome. She's having so much fun with it. So we all went down to my grandma's house, and she had a Nintendo Entertainment System and Super Mario Brothers. And I remember playing it thinking it was the greatest thing I've ever played in my life. The graphics were so amazing. This audio was incredibly mind-blowing. And the video game business rised. Now, what happened to cause this crash was what we call a flood. Back then, it only took one person, 3 to 7 days, to create a video game for the Atari, and that was simply coding it. And it got to where multiple people could do it, and they just started flooding the market with video games, just game after game after game. And it became to the point where they were not worried about quality; they were just worried about quantity. They just want to get it out and get the sales because it was a booming industry. People were making money, fist over foot, hand over fist, whatever you want to call it. Lots and lots of money. So the quality suffered. And you had games like E.T. that were garbage. In fact, when the crash hit, they took all these extra Atari console games and they put them into a single landfill. It's the Atari graveyard. And it's actually being excavated as we speak. And they have found millions of copies of E.T. And a lot of these games still intact, which is really cool. And E.T. is considered one of the worst games in history. I will be doing an episode in the near future of my top 10 favorite games of all time and the top 10 worst of all time, based on my opinion. After all, this is my opinion. And you guys feel free to argue with me all you want in the comments below. I appreciate your thoughts on everything I do here. Okay, so with this constant flood of garbage coming into the market, the video game prices, and I lived through this. I remember this in my childhood. I remember my grandmother taking me to the local video game store and buying me these games that went from $40 to $50 a piece down to $5 to $10 a piece. So I would get these loads of video games from my grandmother, from my Atari, and go home and play on my black and white television. I'm that old. I was pretty young back then. Back in 1983, I was 4. 87, I was 8. That dates me. I'm sorry. But I have a lifelong experience in the video game industry. Lifelong professionally and non-professionally. So, there was a lot of trends of saturation. Like I said, mentioning that the amount of new software, this is a quote here, mentioning that the amount of new software coming in will only allow a few big hits. That retailers had too much floor space for systems, along with price drops for home computers, could result in an industry shakeup. And it did. The competition was remarkably huge. There were new companies coming out all the time that were producing new home computers and home entertainment systems, and it became a flood of gaming. And then when I think what happened is Nintendo realized that with all this inflation of garbage, that they had to come up with something that was quality. And they did. They really did. However, the Nintendo Entertainment System was flawed. It did have its issues. I mean, we all know, all of us in my age and my generation know about the shaking, blowing out the cartridge, and sliding it in until it just clicks in and you can get it to work. The SNES was an 8-bit system. So it was the same bit type as the Atari, but it had a different processor, which made it more powerful and able to do brighter colors, more vivid, and it had a ton more memory. And that's what we call the second generation of video gaming. The first generation was the Atari 2600. The second generation, NES, and then the Sega Genesis. Now, we did it back in the day, we counted it as the bit generations. Which today, the bits don't even count. And it was always by increments of double. That's how computing works. So you had the SNES was the last of the second generation, last of the 8-bits, or the NES, sorry. Then the SNES came out, and that spawned the 16-bit generation. Amazing graphics. I remember going with my other grandmother to the store, so she wanted to get a new game console for her husband, my grandfather, to play golf on. She heard it would be a great way to play golf in home. And I remember talking her into buying Pilot Wings for the Super Nintendo, and I remember playing that constantly, thinking it was the most amazing graphics I'd ever seen in my life. So, that your 16-bit generation was a very... It took the video game industry even further. Then you took in the fourth generation, which spawned the 32-bit and 64-bit generation, because only one system was a true 64-bit system, and that was the Nintendo 64. Great concept, but it eventually failed. And that's when Nintendo's decline began. It was with the N64. Because the PlayStation came out, the 32-bit system, mind you, that outsold the 64-bit system hand and foot. But it also, the fifth generation, was the spawn of the 3D gaming. And that started with the N64. So the SNES the PlayStation kind of skipped the 64-bit generation, went right to 128-bit, and that's kind of where the bits fall off the map. That's when we no longer count it. Now it's just generations of gaming. So, the PlayStation 2 was 128-bit. The GameCube was 128-bit. The 6th generation of video gaming was pretty awesome. And that's where, I guess, systems started to be what we know of gaming home consoles is at now. That's what really defined, the 6th generation defined where we're at in gaming today. And that was with the Sega Dreamcast, their last foray into the video game hardware market. When the Dreamcast failed, the company just closed their doors and they closed their hardware department and said, we're going software. And they've been booming ever since. Now, Nintendo GameCube was the last system that was considered a success for Nintendo. And the Xbox also came out during the 6th generation. So that's what I mean by defining where we're at today. Now, the Xbox outsold PlayStation and every other system in the United States only. Worldwide, the PlayStation 2 took the market and was the greatest selling home console system of all time. The PlayStation 2 has the most sales of any home console ever, beating out even the PlayStation 4, Xbox One. Xbox One sales are the worst Xbox sales in Microsoft's history of going into the video game market. For good reason, but that's for another episode. So yeah, the video game crash really sparked a need for quality over quantity in the video game industry. And now, with the fact that games have become so expensive to make, as much as movies now, several hundred millions of dollars in the big blockbuster titles, which is also why we now have a big boom of indie development, because they can do it cheaper with now the way the computers are. It makes it easier to create a crappy title with only a few people, or with like 30 people, a really good title. But I talk about that in a previous episode about indie development, so you can check that out as well. So the sales in video game have been increasing an average of 300 to 500% per year. And it's kind of tapered off the last few generations. But video games have now become the #1 entertainment industry in the world. Oh, beating out porn for the first time actually about 4 years ago, which is pretty big accomplishment. Porn was the leading entertainment industry for 20 years. True story. Look it up. If you guys want to get a little bit more reading done, I will find some good articles for the video game crash of 1983, and I'll put it down in the comments below. Yeah, if you guys want more history lessons on video gaming, I will be more than glad to do it. Suggest topics in the comments below, or email the show, dailygameropinion@gmail.com, and I will be glad to do them. I love doing this kind of thing. I love showing off my knowledge. Just talking about video games in general, really. And that is it for today. And that was not my opinion. This is my history lesson for you guys today in the video game industry that really defined what the video game industry is today. Thank you, and there will be a test on Monday. Good day.